Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are delighted that you're part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. Thank you so very, very much. Our guest today is Sherry Howard. She is here to celebrate her middle grade novel, The Spirits Among Us. She's also here to help us acknowledge National Disabilities Awareness Day. Since we're publishing this episode of the podcast on National Disabilities Awareness Day, I want to make you aware of a video that I think you'd enjoy watching with your kids. It's called Meltdown, The Walls That Separate. I had the honor of writing, producing, and appearing in this video back in 1989. The video is all about celebrating friendships. And it chronicles the friendships that grew between a group of kids that I was working with at a school for kids with severe developmental disabilities, and a group of kids at a typical public school. The friendships are beautiful. And the story of how those friendships grew is interwoven with a really fun stage show. Hey, you're going to get to see me with hair, and you're going to get to hear my formerly obnoxious Boston accent in full force. Check it out today. It's available on YouTube, but the easiest way to do it, to see it, is to go to our website. We're going to write a blog about it, so check out our blog, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Meltdown entry on our blog. It's Meltdown, The Walls That Separate. Joining us on the line right now from the beautiful state of Kentucky. She is returning to the show to celebrate a brand new middle grade novel called Spirits Among Us. Please welcome back Sherry Howard. Sherry, how are you?
I'm great, Jed. How are you today?
I'm really well, and I'm really excited to learn about this new middle grade novel. Please tell us all about it.
Well, I'm really excited about it. It's one of those novels that has been a long time in the making and seen a lot of revision, but as it was finally printed and published, it is a middle grade novel about loss and friendship and family. A young girl and her best friend are looking to connect with the spirit of her mother, who died in the same accident that crippled the main character, Scooter, who had the nickname Scooter before she needed an actual electric scooter. Mm-hmm. But in the story, she is an electric scooter. So she and her best friend are searching for the spirit of her mom because they live in Appalachia. And in Appalachia, according to a little bit of license, if you don't connect with the spirit of your loved one within the first year, you may not ever be able to do that. So they're rushing to meet this deadline of connecting with Mama. And in the meantime, they're very interested in spirits because Mama was. That was something they all shared. So they're also searching for any spirits. And instead of a spirit, they find a robber, a local robber. So the book has really several threads, as most books do. And one of the threads is a little bit of a mystery about the robber that's in the city. But the main story is about a young girl who loses her mama and loses her use of her legs at the same time.
Wow. This is really fascinating. There's so many different, you call them threads. I like to call them roads down to travel here. It sounds like Spirit gives us not only a look into the life of someone who's lost their ability to walk and therefore relies on a wheelchair or a scooter to get around, but also gives us a look into the lives of people who live in a part of the country that is kind of a mystery. You know, we hear the word Appalachia. I know I've traveled through different parts of Appalachia, but it's, you know, I think for most folks, it's just a name and people don't know a lot about it. So why don't we start there? Can you tell us a little bit about when we talk about Appalachia, what are we talking about?
It's just a section that really includes several states, and sort of the tip eastern edge of Kentucky is included, and then it's just a little chunk of states right there. I'm not even sure what all it includes. I think parts of, I know parts of Tennessee, parts of Kentucky, which is the locale I'm looking at. And actually, when I submitted this book, there were two things that I think the editor was hooked by, and that was the fact that it was set in Appalachia, which is often not represented in books, and the fact that the young girl is trying to relearn to walk from a spinal cord injury, which I've also experienced. So I was able to write that very authentically, and he liked both of those aspects of it. But Appalachia is so often misrepresented as just this hotbed of poverty. And there is a lot of poverty, but my mother's family is from Appalachia. And back in probably, I don't know, early 1900s, a lot of people started moving away from Appalachia to cities. And so between the loss of coal mining during the century and the exodus of people trying to earn more money, what's left in Appalachia is sometimes very lightly populated. But I grew up hearing all the sayings that come from Appalachia, and that was just a normal part of my life because my mother's mother was born in the area. And it was just so much a part of our life that I don't even, I remember studying it some, as I was writing the book just to make sure that it was still authentic today. But a lot about Appalachia hasn't changed. They're just so rich in storytelling and folklore and family. And, that's what my mother remembers about it, is that the strength of the family overrides everything else. And really what you hear about, for instance, like the Hatfields and the McCoys, I don't know that that's specifically said in Appalachia, but it sounds like a rivalry that might be where you might have two families that were dead enemies in a way that you might not find anywhere else. You might see a picture of a bunch of men lined up on a porch with either guns or fiddles. And either one could happen in Appalachia. But it's just a part of my history that I love.
Well, that is, I've heard all those different stories, and I know as I've traveled through that, the one thing that was very apparent to me is that that the communities are very tight knit, and there's that strength and that bond, and that's a pretty wonderful thing to have. Of course, when it gets into a blood feud that lasts for decades, that's not so cool. But, I think that that's something that a lot of communities are missing. And you have, these apartment buildings in cities that are 30, 40, 50 stories, and how many people live in this one small piece of land who never have any connection with each other. And that, to me, kind of boggles my mind. That's also a culture that I'm not familiar with at all.
And it's my mother remembers so many of the stories, and she remembers a feud in her family where blood kin fell out with each other and held a grudge for decades. And that was just not at all uncommon, she said, for that to happen. And then, plus you had that generation. My grandmother, I think, was born like right around 1900. And that generation, are the generation that started moving away to the cities to find work. So even within our own family, there was a blood blood kin feud that, they didn't speak to each other really until death. You know, they never spoke to each other again. And yet Mom also remembers that if one person in an area had food, everybody had a little.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
And I think a lot of those same, characteristics are still there when you look into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So important to share with one another and to be willing to help your neighbor. What a beautiful thing, what a beautiful culture to be a part of. I also want to talk a lot. We're publishing this interview on National Disabilities Day. I have worked with a number of folks who have different who struggle with different disabilities. I worked with at a school for kids with severe developmental disabilities, and many of them were in wheelchairs. You said that in writing the story about Scooter, you drew on a lot of your own experiences as you rehabbed from a spinal injury. Can you talk a little bit about that, a little bit about your experience, a little about how that informed Scooter's experience?
Sure. I've had to relearn to walk twice, and I still walk with the assistance of a walker now, not because of old age, but because of a spinal cord injury, although I am aging up there. But I use the walker to mobilize because I don't have strength in my legs. But when I was a young girl, about Scooter's age, about 12 years old, they discovered I had severe scoliosis. And at the time, it was treated very differently than it is now. And I had a very extensive surgery, spent a year in a cast, flat in bed, and had to relearn to walk at about exactly the age she is relearning to walk. So I have really strong memories of that. And then again, later in life, I was assaulted, and because I have what's called a tethered spinal cord, that was injured, and I received a spinal cord injury that they can't do anything about. It just is what it is. So I did have a surgery, which helped a little bit. It got me up out of a bed. So I still deal with, like I dealt with in childhood and in adulthood, with that whole issue of relearning to walk when you've been unable to walk for a while.
Yeah. You know, I think this is really, from what you're telling me, it sounds like a really fun story. I know kids love the spirits and connecting with spirits and that kind of ghost story kind of stuff. But I also think it's a valuable experience for kids to be able to go into the mind and kind of experience what a person who is struggling with a severe injury has to deal with. You know, we know people in our lives that have to rely on walkers or wheelchairs. We don't ask questions because it's impolite. It would be rude. You got to pretend that isn't there, that person, we just have to pretend and because it's rude to ask. And one of the experiences I had advocating, and that was my job, was advocating for these kids with severe disabilities, is that the questions are really, that's a great way. It's a foundation on which to build relationships. And so I think that this is going to give kids an opportunity to have some empathy, some more understanding, to see that a person in a wheelchair has a personality, they have feelings, they're angry, they're sad, they love, they cry, and they can be a great pal.
All of those things, and that was really important to me because I spent my teenage years in a hospital for crippled children. So I personally identify as crippled. A lot of people don't like that word, but it's an okay word with me. That is the core of my identity. But when I represented Scooter in the book, I wanted to represent Scooter as a whole person who happened to have a mobility problem. Mm-hmm. So there's really not much time in the book spent on having a disability. I hope it's just enough to maybe answer some questions that children might be curious about with someone with a similar situation. But yet her life is her life. A best friend. She's a ghost hunter. She runs a YouTube channel. She goes pretty much anywhere she wants to go. She's a really interesting kid. And many, as you know, many children with disabilities are super interesting kids. Mm-hmm. And that was what I really wanted to get across the most, was that those disabilities or impairments or whatever they're called don't identify the person, but the core of the person identifies the person. Mm-hmm. So that part of it was really important to me. I hope I did that.
Yeah. Well, I know I've shared this on the podcast in the past, but I thought it'd be good to remind folks. One of the kids at that school that I worked at, she was one of the few kids who was able to do some walking with assistance. She wasn't able to speak, but she was able to communicate with her smile and her eyes. And her and I became we've did a lot of advocating for kids and going out and meeting people. She was part of a program I was working on to help develop friendships between kids at a typical public school and the kids in the school that I worked at. And when we would go over to the school and start talking to different classrooms about what we were doing, we would see this teacher in the hallway. And I said to Jennifer, who was 9 or 10 at the time, I said, wow, she's really cute. And I remember Jennifer laughing. And I think she was laughing because she kind of knew in her mind that this guy ain't never going to go over there and introduce myself to this teacher. And one day she was able to kind of get out of my line of vision and walked over and started communicating with this teacher. And I looked and found her. And when I went over to go, that was my introduction to this teacher who later became my wife. And we've been together for 30 years. And Jennifer was our flower girl, and we actually just had a chance to celebrate Jennifer's 40th birthday. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
What a wonderful meet cute romance story.
Just wonderful. And Jennifer was absolutely right. I never would have found the courage to get up and introduce myself to that teacher.
It's, Jennifer was the name, yep. Right? Mm-hmm. Of the student. Jennifer did something, and you said she was super young. Mm-hmm. That I have another book that's a work in progress that's a middle grade also. And one of the things I'm trying to do, there are certain things that I have in any book I write, and one of them is always some sort of disability or other able. So I have a young character who's about 9 years old and a little boy with Down syndrome, because I also was principal at a special school. Ah. And I think we've chatted a little bit about that before. Mm-hmm. And there was a child there with Down syndrome who absolutely inspired me with her wisdom. Now, she had a lot of trouble with books, but she was extremely wise. So this character isn't really based on that child because it's a boy and it's a very different person in many ways. But the wisdom of that child in my school is what I'm trying to grab, mm-hmm. show how much wisdom a child with a perceived disability can have, sort of as a superpower.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love, the more we're speaking, and we've been a big advocate here in the program, not only for parents to read with their young kids. But I think we've really tried to advocate for parents to continue that as their kids get older and become independent readers. And I know it's not always comfortable for parents to read aloud with their older kids, but there should be no barrier between that keeps parents from co-reading with their kids. And I think that Spirits Among Us, there's so many, as you said, there's so many threads to talk about that can really inspire some pretty important conversations with our kids as we're driving to soccer practice or ballet or whatever it is. Instead of just popping on the music and listening to some senseless and maybe vulgar music that's online, we can have a conversation about different parts of the country and how sometimes we have these preconceived notions about different parts of the country that are unfair. And they're not only unfair to the people who live there, they're unfair to us because it might prevent us from exploring and taking advantage of opportunities to become friends and have relationships with folks not only in those parts of the country, but folks with different ability levels. And you also, Spirits Among Us also talks about loss and spirituality. And I think that's a super important conversation to have with our kids.
Well, sort of, I guess, it's not a funny punchline, but it's the ultimate discovery by Scooter. She's looking, she really believes in the manifestation of spirits, that you can at times communicate with them, as many people do believe, particularly in that area of the country. However, what she discovers about her own loss and her own mother is that in reality, her mother's always with her, that the spirit of her mother surrounds her all the time. And I think that's important for kids who lose anybody. They need to feel that. They need to know that. And, I guess if I picked out the main thread of the book or the main theme, it would be about love and loss because, this family was destroyed by loss. They lost their mother. It affected the father. You don't see much of that, but you see a little bit. An uncle and a grandmother came to live with them, so it affected them. So, you almost have to realize that in our era, kids lose parents all the time. It's not always to death either. It's often to some sort of a separation through divorce or, God forbid, all the other ways that children can separate from parents. So that, for me, that was one of the, if not the main thing, one of the main things that I did want to achieve also, is that you can lose somebody who is so central to your life that you would rather lose your ability to walk than lose them. But you can still survive. You still find a way to keep moving forward. So I just think kids need to know that because we're in an era, not just with COVID, but with the way our families have developed and split and morphed into so many different things. Kids need to know that you can survive loss.
That is so incredibly important. And I'm really, we've used the term bibliotherapy here on the podcast a lot. And I think bibliotherapy, going and reading stories, immersing yourself in stories to help you understand whatever it is that you're dealing with, it can be very, very powerful. But even more, that power can be magnified when we do it together as a family.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm a real believer in family reading. One of the things we did, a while back, and it's hard for me to rally the children in my family. They're here, but they're really devoted to their electronics. But I did make them sit with me and read the book Hatchet, which is a wonderful family read. I mean, of all the things you can read aloud. But I also can see a book like Spirits being a great, interesting story for anybody to read. And, you know, we sort of talk about that crossover sometimes where the adults enjoy it as much as the kids do. And one of my nieces just posted a picture that she'd gotten it, and I said, well, I hope she has a child that age. I said, I hope Will enjoys it. And she said, we're all going to read this book. So, you know, that included an older teenage daughter and a husband and a wife and a child in the age group this really aimed for. So that was exciting to me to hear that the whole family would read it.
Yeah. And honestly, you know, middle grade novels there's some of my favorite reads, you know, because they're fast. It's a fast read. Typically, the chapters are shorter. And I said this to other authors. You know, when I skip, you know, when I come to a chapter, I look ahead, and if the chapter is 5 or 6 pages, I'm probably going to stick with it. If I'm looking and I don't know if I'm going to stop you or not, and I look and see that the next chapter is 45, 50, 60 pages, that book is getting close.
Right. Now, this book ended up, let me see, I have it sitting here. It ended up being 200 and something pages. But the pages, I don't know if you get the mirror image of this or not, but the pages are so readable. You know, it's a small book. The hardback is almost like holding a paperback book. It's just a nice size to hold. The pages are wonderful. And most middle grade writers are going to deliberately make those chapters very short and with a really good hook at the end, because we know that's more likely to keep the child turning the pages.
Yeah.
Middle grade, for me, I was a middle grade teacher and middle grade principal, and what I found generally was that kids either loved to read at that age or they hated to read at that age. And that was when the great divide seemed to start happening with kids, because, you know, in elementary, they're a little more compliant with what the teacher and mom and dad or grandma want them to do. Middle school, they start growing away from that a little bit. So I really hate the divide that is there. And I think that if we make enough books that are enticing and appealing and quick to read, like you said, and fast page turns and the appropriate kind of layout to get kids to not feel overwhelmed with the print, with tiny little print, I think that we can really pull more kids in if we really work hard to do that.
Absolutely. Well, Sherry, I know folks are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about Spirits Among Us. So where can folks connect with you online?
Well, I have a website, which I don't really do much with, but it's Sherry Howard Writes for Kids. And I know you always follow up and post some of these things too. And honestly, you just kind of Google my name and I'm everywhere, because I like social media. I'm on Facebook and Twitter, and I enjoy talking with other writers, readers, kids, whomever jumps into the conversation. I enjoy that. So, you know, my website has links for all those other things, the Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I love Instagram too. So they can find me anywhere. All they have to do is Google my name and I pop right up.
That's awesome. Well, we want to encourage everybody to check out Spirits Among Us and also Google Sherry Howard. Sherry, thanks so much for being back on the show.
Thanks, Jed. It was great.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. David MacArthur will be here celebrating his picture book, What does a caterpillar do? Now, I want to let you know, you don't want to miss this episode of the show because the interview goes in a direction that no one expected it to go. It's a really incredibly powerful conversation that you don't want to miss. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so very wonderful. Of course, we want to thank our guest, Sherry Howard. Be sure to check out Spirits Among Us. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty and Fatima Khan. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me, but most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.